Welcome back to Morning at NTV. It's 7:46 a.m. So let's get into that conversation that you've all been waiting for, Kickstarter to be precise. And this morning we'll be focusing on understanding the conflict dynamics around refugee settlements in northern Uganda. We all have been seeing this, that particular tension between the host communities and the refugees. And so we do have a report by the International Refugee Rights Initiative, and we'll be delving into that just to get to understand, do we have any peace drivers or any strategies that are being put in place to ensure that these tensions no longer exist, so to speak. So in studios, I'm joined by Ms. Achieng Akena. She is the ED of the International Refugee Rights Initiative. Thank you so much for making time, and welcome to Morning at NTV.
Thank you.
All right, so we do have a report that is coming through, and let's just get straight into the general, outcome of the same. Mm-hmm. And people want to understand, does the report tell us that, hey, we're getting into, a positive side of things in terms of, tensions being eased off, or it's getting worse by the day? Mm-hmm. What's the reality on the ground in northern Uganda?
I think the reality on the ground is that human relations are never easy. And the more that issues remain unresolved, the more likely they are to trigger increased reactions each time. And so what we're seeing is that as long as the tensions remain high and those pressure points are not relieved, the conflict between the refugees and the host communities continues to grow. Mm-hmm. And what tends to happen is that issues that would otherwise be ignored because they're small issues can actually erupt into intercommunal conflicts. Simple things as a fight between children have been seen to erupt in big conflicts, as well as disputes over fetching of water.
Wow, it's interesting to see that that's the magnitude that we're looking at in terms of these particular tensions. But when you go on ground, what is it that they fight over, so to speak? Is it the basic resources like water, land to do their agriculture? What exactly is it? Because you do know that refugees are catered for by the different, organizations that are international, so to speak, in terms of foods and, all these other things. What is it then? Because you ideally think that, hey, refugees are catered for, and then host communities also do, fend for their lives in one way or another. They work for it. So what is that integration point that, rises or boils up into conflict, so to speak?
Well, I think the reality of a settlement is that you've first taken a lot of people and you've put them in one place. And refugee settlements tend to be in areas that are not necessarily very lavish and well developed, or have good agricultural or climate a good agricultural climate. Mm-hmm. And so what tends to happen is you find that first, to address the question about refugees being provided for by international communities, the rations that they get are meager, just enough to survive. And so a lot of times refugees have to supplement their resources, have to supplement the food that they have, and they do so by being able to use the land around the settlements for agriculture, for firewood, and so forth and so on. And so this is what the conflict is over. Some of these conflicts are not just linked to refugees, they are also linked to other larger problems that Uganda faces. So for example, issues around land ownership. So you find that where there's no clear land ownership, even when an arrangement is reached in terms of the host community and the refugees, because there's no clarity of who owns the land, it results in certain disputes that make it difficult. There are local initiatives that have been done whereby the local LC representatives as well as the local refugee representatives come together and either foster dialogue between the two communities or foster agreements between the landowners and the refugees. But these agreements they're not stable, because there's a lot of issues involved, and so there's an expectation that there'll be certain kinds of compensation, and when those don't come through, either the land becomes withdrawn. Sometimes an agreement has been made, somebody begins to till the land, it's too hard to till, and so the yield is not as good, and so whatever benefit that was coming out is not as much, but the host community, there's an agreement that there will be some benefit to the host community. Sometimes the host communities feel that the refugees have preferential treatment. Sometimes the refugees feel like the host communities have all the benefits, and so I think it's part of it is human relations, part of it is historical, also historical issues that continue to persist in Uganda, and some of it is just specifically when you bring a large group of people into a space and put them together.
You know, when you're talking what is coming out clearly is that even what the leaders in these different communities are doing is to stop something that is already a huge crisis that has already begun, just trying to fix things that are already beyond their reach, so to speak. Are we saying that government did not was not well informed or did not plan adequately enough when they were saying that, hey, we're having this big number of refugees coming into the country, we are known to offer asylum to quite a majority of them, and hey, we need to plan accordingly and say that if we're taking them to land X, then we make sure that all the other factors that will come into play with regards to their survival there are catered for? Are we saying that these are planning gaps, pre-planning gaps that we're seeing, and we're trying to fix them on the go, and yet it's hard and it's already late?
Well, it's very difficult to plan for refugees because you never know how many will come. You never know what the influx will look like, and most of the times you don't quite know when the conflict will erupt in a particular country. As we've seen with South Sudan, what has happened is that there was peace, people went back, and then unexpectedly conflict erupted again and people came back. And so it's not something that is that easy to plan for. In comparison with other countries, Uganda has done quite well with its refugee policy, and in terms of trying to ensure that refugees are catered for. But financing is always a big issue. There's never enough resources. There's not enough resources for Ugandans, let alone an influx of about 800,000 more people, up to a million people who are coming back, who are coming into the country. And so that also poses a very big problem. So the issue of collective responsibility and who needs to be able to provide assistance as is needed is also an issue.
Right. When we're having these conversations earlier on, and these are stories that we keenly focus on and follow through, host communities have this type of, is it resentment or something like that, where they feel that they're getting a raw deal. Like you earlier mentioned, they feel like the refugees are actually getting it easier and better, and their lives are much better compared to their own. So when it comes to just finding, lasting solutions, especially to the refugees that are already here, we're already talking of, numbers that touch on 800,000, refugees in the northern Uganda, kind of area. Only
in the settlements.
Exactly, in the settlements. Do we have any lasting solution, especially when it comes to matters that touch on land? Land is very sticky.
It is.
And it's not just about, northern Uganda, but even here in Kampala, we've been seeing these cases day in, day out. So what is the lasting solution, just to ensure that, hey, host communities also feel like, hey, we have a right to what is ours, we can access these basic amenities, and also the refugees at the same time do access the same, and we just find a peace balance, so to speak. What's the ultimate solution?
It's not an easy answer. I think the question around durable solutions is one that has been debated for several years, and it is something that needs to be done based on the situation. Not all refugees anticipate living in Uganda for the rest of their lives. Some do, especially those who were born here or who have lived here for a very long time. They would prefer to be some of them would prefer to be integrated into the community so that they are then able to lead normal lives. They're able to find work, they're able to make families and so forth and so on. And that's integration, which is one of the better considered durable solutions for refugees. But some actually want to go back home. Unfortunately, the situation in South Sudan now does not allow them to be able to do that. There's also a potential solution for relocation to a third country, but that is only about 1% of refugees are ever relocated into third countries, and usually it's refugees who for some reason or another cannot stay in their country of first asylum, either due to increased threat to their lives and security and so forth and so on. So it's not, durable solutions is something that is quite difficult, especially for many governments to do, because it touches also on national factors.
Right.
How far does the government go in prioritizing durable solutions for refugees over other basic bread and butter issues for Ugandans?
So it's an issue of the financial basket and how much can a country can afford, with regards to that. Okay, interesting. You talked of integration, and as we bring this to a wrap, there are also issues to do with intermarriages.
Yes.
And this, causes a lot of conflict, and especially the host communities feel like that should not happen. We are divided. We need to stay as that. You say that intermarriages and that kind of integration is possibly one of the lasting solutions. It's a win in the lasting solution, so to speak. But why are they so against intermarriages, and what exactly happens on ground? What do they say, is the risk of intermarriages? Why are they so off that option?
I think it's human nature. I think it's no different from your parents not wanting you to marry somebody who's not a Christian if they're Christian, or somebody who's from a different community if they're from, or maybe somebody from the north or somebody from the west. I think human beings generally fear the other. And refugee comes with a very big, I feel almost as though the word is very othering, because it makes them the other person. And so the refugees themselves also feel as though they need to maintain their cultures and their traditions, which are very different from the host communities. And so there is not too much intercultural exchange and too much of an understanding of the different practices and cultural systems that exist, even in terms of how you approach a potential spouse, or how you approach their parents. It's very different. But if you'll allow me, there is an issue though in the camp that also has triggered a lot of conflict, and that is an issue of sexual violence against women. It's one that we continuously see in refugee situations, and it has a lot of psychosocial impact, and also sometimes is a source of some of the conflicts that we do see. People come with trauma, and when they come to places where they're supposed to be seeking refuge and being safe, they continue to experience hurt and trauma, and that does really exacerbate some of the conflicts that we see.
Oh wow. So as we wrap this up, we are, experts will call it a heated political, phase for Uganda as we come down to the 2021 general elections. Out of this particular report, what are we doing to ensure that come that time, then we have peace in these particular regions?
The recommendations we make actually are recommendations to the Uganda government, asking them to begin to relieve these pressure points. It is like I said, it's an escalating and protracted situation.
Right.
And so the emotions are also high, and there are a lot of triggers, like Kinder. If you just throw a match in there, it will explode. And so our recommendations are primarily to say, can you please pay attention to these pressure points?
Okay.
Can you please be responsive and do early action so that we're able to prevent an escalation of these little conflicts that we have seen growing in the areas.
All right.
Yeah.
So prevention is the key.
Prevention
we can't
is
find
the
a
key.
lasting solution, but we can go ahead and prevent if we can.
Like I said in the beginning,
Right.
human relations are difficult,
Yeah.
but they're manageable.
They are. All right. Thank you so much, Achena Kenneth, the
Thank you.
ED of the International Refugee Rights Initiative. We wish you all the best, and we hope that this report is taken up and pretty much, the recommendations therein are taken up, so to speak. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right, you're taking a short commercial break. We'll be back with our Take Note conversation. You don't want to miss this.